Innerstate 180 is a junior high and high school youth ministry that meets every Tuesday and is comprised of multiple churches of different denominations in the Dixon, California area. Our vision is for unity within the body of Christ and that true salvation and life change would come to the youth in our area. Weekly podcasts can all be found here on our YouTube channel and are all free for download. And if you'd like more information about our ministry, please visit our Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram at Innerstate 180.
Joseph and his brothers are obviously truly brokenhearted, right? They're weeping over their father for 70 days. And in fact, essentially the whole nation of Egypt is swept up in this grief, okay? So here's the thing. Grief, mourning, weeping over the loss of people is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. It's something that we should encourage. It's something that we should want to do. But you know what? We're Americans right here. And God bless America. And we here in America, we like our comforts, okay? We like to be comfortable. We don't like to be in mourning. We don't like to be in grief because it stinks. It's painful. It's hard. It's difficult. So what we like to do is to try and get on through it as fast as possible. If we've got to ignore the reality of the loss, if we've got to pretend it didn't happen, if we have to distract ourselves with all the distractions that are around us in America, if we got to do that to somehow pretend that nothing happened just so that we can get back to not being in pain anymore, we'll do it. We'll do whatever it takes. We'll take psychiatric drugs, we'll do alcohol, we'll surround ourselves with just friends and people all the time so we never have any chance to think about it. We'll sit in front of TV and the internet and Xbox and we'll do that, or we'll pick up new hobbies, or we'll do whatever it takes to be distracted, to be comfortable, to pretend like nothing happened. Just press right on through that grief as quick as possible. Because we don't like that kind of stuff. It's hard. A lot of times we don't like hard things. But that's a type of idolatry. That idolatry that I have to be comfortable all the time. Nothing can make me uncomfortable. Nothing can be difficult. Nothing can be painful. I shouldn't have to grieve ever. I shouldn't have to mourn at all. That's a type of selfishness. When we just press through our grief as soon as we possibly can, just be over with it and be done with it. It basically says of the person that has died, you're worthless to me. I care more about myself than I care about you. Because bringing up memories about you is painful and difficult. I don't want to think about you anymore. It would be easier for me to pretend like you never existed. That's not what we see Joseph and his brothers doing. And remember that a lot of Joseph's brothers just got some pretty harsh words from their father about their future, right? They might be tempted to say, you know what, forget that guy. I'm glad he's gone because of all the stuff he said about me, passing over me or saying I'm a big loser and I'm just going to be slaves to people. I don't have time for that. And we shortchange grief and basically kicking the person that died to the curb, putting them out with the trash, saying, whatever. But Joseph and his brothers, you look at, they spend time grieving, and basically, when I read this passage, it seems like that's what they did for 70 days. They grieved. That was their sole focus and purpose, is to mourn the loss of their father. And now if you've been with us for any length of time in the book of Genesis, you know that Jacob is not like a sterling father. I mean, he had his fair share of faults. There were plenty of reasons. If they were going to come up with excuses why they should just sort of write him off and be done with him, they could have had their share. They could have come up with plenty of excuses. So, and by the way, this is going to be like 3 or 4 sermons kind of pressed into one. These last kind of things that roll off here. So sit tight. It's like watching an episodes of the Looney Tunes when there's like 4 or 5 different cartoons that only last like 6 minutes. So, thing you should remember, number 1, that we learned from Joseph and his brothers is deal with your grief appropriately. It's okay to grieve. It's a good thing. It's okay to mourn. It's okay to be sad, to be in pain when someone you love has died. That's not something to just press on through. That's not something to just sort of pretend like it never happened. It is a good thing. But notice, verse 4, and when the days of weeping for him were past, they move on with their life. Okay? It's okay to grieve, but you don't grieve forever. There comes a time when the days for weeping should be done. That doesn't mean you've forgotten about the person. That doesn't mean you've put them out of your mind. That doesn't mean you can't ever take time to, recall memories that you shared, think fondly of them, to recall the life that you had with them, to thank God for the life that you shared with them. That doesn't mean you can't ever do that again, but there comes a point in your life when you do need to get on with living life. And that's what they do. They grieve appropriately, and when the appropriate time is over, they get on with their life. Don't rush your grief, but don't prolong it either. Look at back to verse 4 here. And let's read about what they did after they were done grieving. Read down through verse 14. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, now, if I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, I am about to die. In my tomb that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan, there shall you bury me. Now therefore, let me please go up and bury my father, then I will return. And Pharaoh answered, go up and bury your father as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father with him, went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. And when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented with a great and grievous lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. When the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians. Therefore the place was named Abel Mizraim. It is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephraim the Hittite to possess as a burying place. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. Maybe the hardest verse in the whole Bible for teenagers to embrace and be obedient to. And I know because I was a teenager too. It might be hard for some of you to believe that. But I wasn't always a crotchety old man. And I am older than Nick, so I'm pretty old. So, Probably the hardest verse in the Bible for you guys to embrace and own is Exodus 20, verse 12. Honor your father and your mother. Or the New Testament variation, Ephesians 6, 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And we've already mentioned Jacob wasn't the best father. Never won Father of the Year. But he was the one that God had chosen to be one of the fathers of the nation of Israel, God's chosen people. Along with Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, those three men are known as the patriarchs of the nation of Israel. They are known as the fathers of the nation of Israel. And he's also the one that God had ordained to be the father of these 12 brothers, his 12 sons. Joseph and his brothers honor their father by obeying his wishes. And it seems like a simple thing, but he's dead. He doesn't know. He can't do anything about it. And yet they still are obedient to what he asked them to do for him. And it's obviously a fairly big undertaking. If Pharaoh summons all these people to go with Joseph, this huge sort of train of chariots, and everybody goes, they basically take everything but the kitchen sink with them. And it would have been really easy for Joseph and his brothers to say, you know what? It's not going to make a bit of difference where we bury this guy. Yeah, he was our dad, and he wanted us to bury him with his family up there on that threshing floor that Abraham bought, but he's not going to know. The ground's the ground. Why don't we just do it right here in Egypt? Why go to all the trouble of dragging his raggedy bones up there and burying him up there? They could have said that. They could have even said it very politely and very respectfully and come up with some excuse, some reason not to obey him, because he's dead and he can't do anything about it, and truthfully, it doesn't really matter. It's just bones. But that's not what they do. They obey him. They honor him by obeying his wishes. This is what we call character. They did it because it was the right thing to do. There was no reward for it. They didn't get any bonus blessings from Jacob for it. Pharaoh was nice enough to send all these people with him, but he didn't give them any extra stuff just for doing it. It was really a way to honor Joseph. There was no negative consequence either if they didn't, right? There's no bolt of lightning going to come from heaven, strike them where they stood. How often do we obey only because we're motivated either by a reward, a little carrot that's hanging out in front of us, or some negative consequence that we're afraid of? We obey because we want to get something, or we obey because we're afraid of what we're going to get if we don't. How many times is that really the only reason why we honor our parents, why we obey our parents? I know for me, when I was under the roof of my parents, it was one of my primary motivators. Either I wanted them to give me something, or I didn't want them to give me something. So, think about it. We do that a lot. And you know what it leads to then? Lying and deception. That's the reason why we sneak around behind our parents' backs, right? That's the reason why we tell them that we're going to go spend the night at Susie's house, but really we go out to the party. That's the reason why we lie about where we're going. That's the reason why we make up excuses for why we didn't do what we said we would do. Because we want to do what we want to do. We want it to look like we're honoring them. We want it to seem like we're obeying them. We want to save ourselves from the negative consequences, and we want to keep reaping the rewards of obedience, but a lot of times we just want to live our lives. We want to do it our way. And the only thing that's keeping us obedient is the fact that they're around to do something about it. But if nobody knew, if there was a way that we could keep it so that nobody knew what we were doing, then we'd do whatever we want. The only way we're going to have the kind of character to resist that type of temptation, the only way we're going to have the character that motivates us to honor our parents, to put ourselves under their authority, is if the Lord changes our heart, right? Because those kind of things flow out from our hearts. We need God to give us a desire to do what's right. We need Him to instill in us a desire to please Him and not to please ourselves. The desire to do something, no matter how hard it is, simply because it's the right thing to do. That doesn't come from ourselves. That comes from something outside of us. That's not something we can just sort of summon up the courage to do ourselves. We don't have that kind of motivation. I know that honoring our parents and obeying our parents is a hard thing. I know because I stunk at it when I was a teenager. I didn't like it. It's like if somebody, a friend or says, hey, is sitting at your table and says, hey, could you pass the salt? Yeah, here you go. And your mom says, hey, sweetie, would you pass the salt? Come on, Mom. Can't you see I'm eating here? Can't you? It's right in front of you, Mom. Just get it. Why are you always asking me for the salt? Geez, Mom, I swear. Oh. It gets to that point sometimes. There's going to come a day when you're going to look back in your life and you're going to say, I was an idiot. I was a jerk. But here's the thing. I know that for a lot of you, it's hard because your parents are jerks. You got crummy parents. So, remember, this is being recorded. That's right. Hold on, I got to text Jeff real quick here. So, I know that some of you, it is hard that there are probably some of you that do have rotten home lives. But I know that for most of us, we just like to pretend our home life is worse than it really is so that we can excuse our rebellion, so that we can excuse our dishonoring behavior towards our parents, so that we can justify our disobedience. That nobody's parents are perfect, no person is perfect. And we can just use that as an excuse for the way that we behave towards our parents. We're supposed to honor our parents and be obedient to our parents in the same way that Peter tells us that we're supposed to be subject to the governing authorities. That there's no authority in our life that is not ordained and appointed by God. And there's going to be many times, that's why people argue about politics all the time, because there's never a perfect government either. They're always doing stuff that we don't like. And so we, if we wanted to, could find all sorts of excuses for disobeying the laws in the same way that we find excuses for disobeying our parents. But God says that's not the way it works. I appoint the authorities and you obey the authorities on one condition. There's only one condition, and that is when the authorities demand that you disobey God. That's the only loophole you get. is when obeying your parents or obeying the governing authorities over you requires that you disobey God. And that doesn't happen as often as we think it does. Most of us, our parents aren't terrible. Most of us, our parents are very lovely people. And we just need to believe that they're terrible to justify the way that we treat them. So, learn a lesson from Joseph and his brothers and quit being jerks and disobeying your parents. Okay? Let's keep reading on. Verse 15. Let's see, where are we? When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, and this is where it gets interesting. That was interesting, but this gets really interesting. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us, pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave his command before he died. Say to Joseph, 'Please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil against you. And now please forgive the transgressions of the servant of God, of your father.'" And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." So here's what happens. If you remember what Joseph's brothers did to him, it was pretty terrible. Okay? First they wanted to kill him, then they decided, no, we're not that bad, but we'll be almost that bad. They threw him in a well, made Jacob believe that he had been killed, and then they sold him into slavery, where he basically spent the next 13 years of his life, either enslaved or imprisoned. It's a pretty rotten thing to do. But you know also that there came a point in their lives when they were reunited, and Joseph extended forgiveness, remarkable forgiveness to them. And we talked about that. Can you imagine how hard that must have been for Joseph, and what kind of strength he must have needed to depend on God, and how he must have had to believe with all his heart that God really did intend that for good. And Joseph forgave them. But now Jacob is out of the picture. And his brothers begin to think, I wonder if that was all just a show. If he was just trying to please Dad. And now that Dad's gone, he's going to make us pay for it. That he's going to come after us. So they get nervous and they think, well, you know what? He obeyed what Jacob said about the burial. So maybe if we tell him that, Dad said to forgive us, that he really wanted you to forgive us. So, it's Dad, so come on, man, you got to forgive us. They tried to do that. Do you ever have a hard time trusting that people really have forgiven you? That they do everything they can to convince, that you are forgiven. But deep down in your heart, you're wondering, are they just saying that? Are they trying to trick me? Are they going to change their mind? And you're always sort of looking back, wondering, is it real? When you run in a race, you don't do very well if you're always looking backwards. I don't do very well even when I'm looking forwards all the time, but I know if you want to be competitive, you can't be looking over your shoulder all the time. And this is what they're doing. They're looking over their shoulder. They can't believe that Joseph is that good a guy, that he's really just going to forgive them, and that he has forgiven them, and that it's over with, it's done with. And what about God? Did you ever have a hard time believing that God really is going to forgive all your sins just because you put your faith in Jesus Christ? Isn't there something else I have to do? Is it really just that easy that he's going to send his son? His son is going to live a sinless life. He's going to die on the cross. He's going to rise from the dead. And I just have to put my faith in that? And I get forgiveness of my sins? It can't be that easy. That can't be what it means. There's got to be, I have to do something else, I'm sure. I'm sure God, my sins are pretty bad. I stole the stickers from Walmart once. If you talk to people, a lot of times there's so many people who have the hardest time believing the claims of Christianity just because they can't believe that God would forgive them. It's so tragic. I wonder if you can identify with the fear of Joseph's brothers. Has Joseph truly forgiven them? But here's an amazing thing that they do that they've never done. And maybe this is why God put this on their heart or whatever. They actually asked Joseph to forgive them. They've never done that before. They didn't even know who Joseph was in Egypt. He could have wiped them off the map. He could have starved them to death. He could have done whatever he wanted to them. And he's the one that made himself known to them. He's the one that tells them all is forgiven. Just go get Dad and bring him to Egypt. When it comes to forgiveness, it's hard to forgive people. And there is that temptation to not trust that people have forgiven us. But I think the hardest thing to do is to ask for forgiveness. Because it means you have to humble yourself. You have to kill your pride. You can't go making excuses. You can't go justifying what you've done, trying to find some sort of reason why you had to do it and you just don't understand the situation I'm in. You got to humble yourself. You got to own your sin when you ask for forgiveness. And that's hard to do, right? We want people to think good of us. We want people to think we're good. And to go and ask forgiveness means we have to admit we're not. We need to be forgiven. Joseph's response is so good. Let's look at verse 19. And Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God?" Joseph says, look, I'm not God. Of course, I will forgive you. Of course, I have forgiven you. I am not in a place to judge you. That's God's job. God is the judge of all the world. And I'm not in a place to question why God caused the things to happen to me in the way that they did. God's in control and he knows what he's doing. Joseph says, as for you, and this is sort of the key verse in all of Genesis. As for you, verse 20, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Even Joseph recognizes that the good that God meant for the pain that he endured wasn't really for him. It was for his family. It was for the Egyptians. It was for all these people so that they would live. In Romans chapter 9, Paul talks about this picture of God being a potter, and we are like clay. And God, being God, has the right to fashion us into whatever he desires. The clay doesn't get to say to the potter, I don't like what you're making me. I don't like what you're doing to me. No. That's the potter's prerogative to shape the clay as he wishes. And that's in essence what Joseph is saying to his brothers. Look, I'm not in the position to withhold judgment or to withhold my forgiveness from you because I'm not God. And God's the one in the position to do to me as he sees fit. And I am simply expected to trust and obey him. Life is hard. The best life in this earth has pain in it as well. Nobody gets to live a pain-free life. And what we learn from the life of Joseph is the believer, when they're forced into the midst of trials and difficulties, the one who trusts God doesn't ask, why me, God? Why did you let this happen to me? You know, Matt's been going through a lot of health issues for a long time now. He doesn't get to say, why me, God? The true believer asks, what can I do to glorify you in this moment? What can I do to glorify you in this trial you've put me in? That's what Joseph is. It's so amazing to see how, I'm sure it was much harder than it seems in Scripture. It seems like he just embraces that easily. That bring it on, God, you know, whatever the pain is, I trust you and I know that it's for my good and your glory. I'm sure there were times where he was crying. I'm sure there was nights where he was thinking, why me, God? What did I do? You know, I just got this coat from my dad and then I told him my dreams and everything fell apart after that. I didn't know why. But Joseph so often realizes that this is God's doing and he's simply expected to glorify God in the moment. Now, if you've been paying attention, hopefully some of you have, it seems like I've taken this section of Joseph's life and turned it into a list of do this, do this, do this, do this. Be a forgiving person. Obey your parents. Grieve the right way. You know, all these sorts of things. And so often that tends to be what we do with God's word. Here's a bunch of stuff you're supposed to do. No, have at it. That can be so discouraging, can't it? Because we do such a crummy job obeying. None of us are very good at it. But that's why we need Jesus. We can't possibly be good enough to measure up to God's perfect standards. But Jesus did. So we have something called grace. Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. Salvation is by grace alone. It's not by God's grace plus all your good works. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 21, Paul says, for our sakes, he, that is God, made him, that is Jesus, to be sin, who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. We're saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. But grace isn't just a gift for our salvation, it's a gift we get to keep for all eternity. Grace is like a safety rope. Have you ever seen those videos of those crazy free climbers that climb up those, hundreds and hundreds of foot cliffs with no ropes, and they're just chucking right up there? That's fun until you fall, right? You only make the mistake once, right? Man, that was awesome. It was so bad that you 200 foot up there, you slipped off that rock and you died. That's a bummer. That's how sin works, right? You only get to sin once and then you're done. You're destined for hell. There's actually worse news than that, but we'll save that for another time. That is that you're born into sin. So, but here's the thing. It's a lot different if you have safety ropes, right? When you're climbing that cliff, it's still difficult, but you have the freedom to fall and not fear dying. That's what grace is. It's the freedom to mess up. It gives us the freedom to be obedient without fearing failure. We can be obedient without fearing that I have to be obedient or I'm going to hell. I have to be obedient or God's going to hate me. No. What grace does is it lets us live a joyful life, live like lights in a dark world, rather than as a discouraged sinner trying to work your way to heaven. So yes, be obedient, but be dependent on God's grace to help you. Trust him completely because, as Joseph says, he's in control. Now let me read the last couple verses here. That's really the end of my sermon, but we have to finish Genesis. Basically, the end of Genesis is basically, and then Joseph died too, okay? So yeah, let's see Joseph on to his final resting place. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also at Machir, the sons of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. And then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. It's an interesting thing as we go through into Exodus, which we're not going to do. Don't panic, anybody. You know that the Israelites stay in Egypt a lot longer than they wanted to. But actually Moses, when he leads the people of Israel out of Egypt, they take Joseph's bones with them, and they bury him in the land of Canaan.